Hi, in this video we're going to play a little game of Name That Chord. So we're in a key that has 3 sharps, which means what? It means that if you're looking at the circle of fifths, or if your key knowledge is already well established, you know that we're now in the key of A major, or in its relative minor, F sharp minor. And as soon as you're going to name some chords, label some chords, it's pretty imperative to know which key you're actually in. If you try and do this in A major when it's in F sharp minor, or vice versa, then you're going to get a load of results that don't make any sense. So knowing which key we're in is important. I should say that these chords are not meant to be related to each other as a chord progression. Some of it works quite nicely as a chord progression actually, but that's not the intention. We're just looking at individual chords, but all of these chords are inside a key. So the first thing you need to decide is, are we in A major or are we in F sharp minor? Well, a few clues. We've got some E sharps sort of lurking around, haven't we? So E sharps wouldn't really indicate A major to us, but if we were in F sharp minor, where the 7th note is E natural, when you raise the E natural, it becomes it becomes E sharp. So E natural becomes E sharp. So that's what we might expect to happen in the key of F sharp minor. The first chord also looks as if it might be something to do with F sharp minor as well. So I think the balance of evidence is that we're in F sharp minor. Now you might be looking along this end of things thinking, well, that's all very well, but that's got G naturals in it and that's got a B sharp in it. Well, we'll come to those chords later. But you may want to freeze this for a moment and just see if you can work out your own answers to what you think these 10 chords are, and then you can come back. So if you want to play it as a quiz for your own amusement, pause for a moment, see if you can name the chords and come back to us. And then meanwhile, I'm going to carry on and talk through what these chords are. So if we're in the key of F sharp minor, well, it's always a good idea to have some idea what you think the basic chords are. So again, if you've done this many times before, you'll be familiar with it. If you haven't, then the best advice I can give you is simply to write out a scale of F sharp minor and to construct the basic triad. So here we are in F sharp minor, there's the key signature. Because we're doing chords, we're doing harmony, so it's best to think about the harmonic minor scale. So let's just scribble down the notes of the scale of F sharp harmonic minor. I'm not going to put the top note in because it's the same as the first note, so from the point of view of chords, it's only going to throw up the same chord twice. Okay, now in order to find the triads, we put the 3rd and the 5th above each of these notes. Because I've got E sharp, anytime E comes up in another chord, it will also need to be sharp. So I've put an E sharp there. Okay, and guess what? Here's another E sharp there. It's always worth bearing in mind as well that if you're going to have an E sharp or any other accidental in the scale, when you're dealing with the triads, that's going to come 3 times, because E sharp in this case will be the bottom of one triad, it will be the middle of another one, it will be the top of another one. And you see, we're just kind of the alternate chords, aren't they? That we've got this one, miss one, there's one in this one, miss one, there's one in that one. So that's kind of useful stuff just to remind yourself about. And then if we're going to do the conventional chord naming system, we use Roman numerals, and we're just literally counting off the degrees of the scale, putting them in Roman numerals because that's then indicating the triads. If you then want to identify the chords, you look at the notes inside the chord and you say, which triad does that belong to? And that will work for much of the time when we're trying to identify things we call diatonic chords. In other words, the basic chords that are based on these 7 triads inside any key. Now, there may be some chords that don't quite fit with that because there's something more complicated going on. We'll come to those a little later. But let's see how we get on with this for starters. So let's look at the first chord. What have we got? We've got F sharp, A, C sharp, F sharp. So if we organise those three notes, you see the F sharp comes twice. So we've got F sharp, A, C sharp. Well, that's looking like chord 1, isn't it? So the correct answer to this one is that this is chord 1. It's entirely based on the notes of the triad from 1 there. Okay, if we look at the second chord, what's this? We've got C sharp again, E sharp and G sharp. So can we see any triad that's got those notes in it? Don't worry if they're all spread out in a different order, that doesn't matter. But the notes that make up this chord are C sharp, E sharp, G sharp. If you're in 4 parts, as we are here, but you only have 3 different notes, it's very likely that you're dealing with one of these basic triads. If you've got more than 3 notes, then if you've got 4 different notes, that's telling us something slightly more complicated is going on. We'll meet those shortly. Okay, so we've got C sharp, E sharp, G sharp. Well, that's looking like chord 5, isn't it? So chord number 2 is actually 5. When you look at the next chord, you might have thought, well, it's almost the same as the second chord here. The G sharp's the same, the E sharp's the same, the C sharp's the same. Just this C sharp's gone down to a B. So it kind of looks like we've got 3 notes that belong to chord 5 again, but we've got this B. Now, what's that B doing there? Because if chord 5 is C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, why would we have B in it? That's because we can extend any of these chords. So, for example, in this case, what have we done here? We've added another note to the top. So do you see how this goes? Each triad has got a root, a third, and a fifth. This one, root, third, fifth, but I've now added a 7th. And I could carry on by adding a 9th or an 11th or a 13th. By the time you get to 15, you're back at the bottom note again. But you can, what we call extended chords, adding a 7th, a 9th, 11th and 13th if you want to. So what this has done is it's got the 3 notes that belong to chord 5 and it's got the 7th as well. So that's why the correct description of this chord is 5-7. So hopefully you can see how that works, and that's where the 7th has come from, because it's an extended chord. And of course you have 4 different notes there, didn't you? So if you have 4 different notes, you might begin by thinking, I wonder if this is an extended chord. If I've got 3 notes that belong to a triad and one other note, just think now, is that a 7th or is it a 9th or something? It may be one of those extended chords. Okay, on to chord 4. Well, what have we got here? We've got D, and D comes again, doesn't it? So D in the bass, D in the alto, F sharp, A. So D, F sharp, A. Again, it doesn't matter that those notes are spread out in whatever kind of order. You could have had these the other way around, F sharp in the alto and D up here in the soprano. But the whole point is the notes that make up that chord are D, F sharp, A. Well, where's D, F sharp, A? It's here, isn't it? So that's a chord 6. It's got no added notes, it's got no 7ths in it or anything, it's just a straightforward chord 6. And we go on to the next one. What have we got here? Well, we seem to have 2 Bs, a D, an F sharp. So what's going on there? B, D, F sharp. Well, it looks as if it's chord 4, isn't it? So let's call that chord 4. One thing to notice about this chord is this. So far, we've had the bottom of the triad in the bass, haven't we? When we had chord 1, F sharp's the bottom of the triad, F sharp's in the bass. When we had chord 5, C sharp's at the bottom, C sharp's in the bass. Now this time, we've got the notes of chord 4, B, D, F sharp. So always think about the notes first. So you know that we have the notes of chord 4, but then we have to say, but interestingly, B is not in the bass, is it? The note in the bass is D, it's the third of the chord. So we could have B in the bass, we could have D in the bass, we could have F sharp in the bass. If B is in the bass, then we say it's chord 4 in root position. If D's in the bass, we say it's chord 4 in first inversion. If F sharp's in the bass, we say it's chord 4 in second inversion. If B's in the bass, root position is chord A, so it's a 4A. But because lots of chords are in root position, if you just say 4, we assume you mean 4A. If if D is in the bass, then it's in first inversion, and we need to call it 4B. If F sharp's in the bass, it's in second inversion, we need to call it 4C. So this is chord 4B, because it's got the notes of chord 4, B, D, F sharp, and because the D, the third, is in the bass. That's a 4B chord. What about the next one, number 6? Notes we've got here, F sharp, A, 2 C sharps. 3 different notes. It's probably a basic triad. So which triad has got those 3 notes in it? Oh, it looks like chord 1 again, doesn't it? F sharp, A, C sharp. So those notes all belong to chord 1. But before we move on, notice what's in the bass. C sharp is in the bass. That's the 5th of chord 1, isn't it? So that's a second inversion chord, A, B, C. So we call that chord 1C. It's got the notes of chord 1, F sharp, A, C sharp, but the 5th, the C sharp, is in the bass, so it's 1C. Okay, what do we think about this one then, the one I've numbered 7? Now we've got 4 different notes there, haven't we? You can see that straight away. So that might be indicating one of these extended chords. Who knows? Let's have a look. What are the notes? We've got B, we've got D, we've got F sharp, we've got G sharp. Oh my goodness, so what's going on here? It sort of looks like it might be something to do with chord 4, you know, B, D, F sharp. Oh yeah, that's nice. But the G sharp is a bit odd, isn't it? Because it's not adding a 7th, a 9th, 11th, a 13th. So it's sort of adding a 6 above the bass. So some people might describe that as a B minor 6 chord or 4/6 or something. But actually, let's look at this another way. If we look at chord 2, G sharp, B, D, okay, G sharp, B, D. If I extend chord 2, then I have that as the 7th. Now then, G sharp at the bottom of that chord, B and D, and F sharp is the 7th. So actually, rather than thinking of it as something to do with chord 4, it's really much more likely to be something to do with chord 2. So this is chord 2, and it has a 7th on it. So it's a 2/7 chord. And it doesn't have G sharp in the bass, it has B in the bass, doesn't it? So the 3rd is in the bass. So it's a 2/7 B chord. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's chord 2, G sharp, B, D. It's got the 7th in it, the F sharp, that's in the alto part. But the 3rd of the chord is in the bass, that B. So it's in first inversion. So it's 2/7 B. Okay. Now we're going into more tricky turf, and if people want to call it a draw so far, that's absolutely fine. I'm just throwing in 3 chords now for the people who can go a little bit further with chords and think about something called chromatic chords. So chromatic chords are chords that use notes that are not in the key, which may seem a funny thing to do, but they add colour. So they kind of function as part of the key, but they're just odd chords that are thrown in to give you a little bit of a surprise factor. Oh, I wasn't expecting to hear that note there. And so that's a chromatic chord, but it will use notes that you're maybe not quite expecting to come across. So have a look at this one. This is a very funny chord, isn't it? We've got 2 Gs, a B and a D. Now, what's the nearest thing to G, B, D? Well, the nearest thing is chord 2, isn't it? But in chord 2, we should have a G sharp. Now, I'll tell you what this chord is, and then if you've identified it, you can see if you're right or not. And if you've never met it before, don't lose any sleep over it. But when you take chord 2 and you lower that 2nd degree of the scale by a semitone, so that G sharp becomes G natural, and you build a major chord on the lowered 2nd degree of the scale. Does that make sense? The 2nd degree of the scale is G sharp, lower it to G natural, build a major chord, G, B, D. That's what we've got here. So this is what we call a Neapolitan chord. Nothing to do with Neapolitan ice cream, but Neapolitan. Okay, and it's a major chord built on the flattened 2nd degree of the scale, normally in first inversion, which you can see is happening here as well because we've got B in the bass. So that's that one. What's the next one? Well, we've got 4 different notes, so it could be something to do with these extended things again. But we've got E sharp, G sharp, B, and we've got D. Now then, what's going on in chord 7? We've got E sharp, B, sorry, we've got E sharp, G sharp, B. If we extend that up there to D, we've accounted for it, haven't it? So, in other words, that looks like a sort of 7-7, doesn't it? However, if you've got minor thirds between each of these intervals, or the equivalent of minor thirds, so E sharp to G sharp, minor third, G sharp to B, minor third, B to D, minor third, and it's built on the 7th degree of the scale, as this one is, then this is a diminished 7th chord. Okay? Diminished 7th chord. So when you can make a diminished 7th chord anywhere just by putting minor thirds on top of each other. But if your diminished 7th is built on chord 7, then that is the diminished 7th in the key of F sharp minor. And what about this one? Well, this is going to cause a lot of angst, I'm sure, because that B sharp leaves you thinking, what on earth is going on here? Well, there's a group of chords called the augmented 6th chords, and that's what we're dealing with. So very quickly, when you make an augmented 6th chord, you build it on the 6th degree of the scale, which is D. In this case, that's the 6th degree of F sharp minor. You put an augmented 6 above that, which is B sharp. You put the tonic in the middle, that's the F sharp, and that's the basic augmented 6th chord. If it just has those 3 notes, it's called Italian. If you then add an augmented 4th above the bass note, which is what this G sharp is, it becomes a French 6. And instead of that, if you had a perfect 5th above the bass, it would be called a German 6. So this is a French 6 in the key of F sharp minor. Now, if French 6 are a step too far at the moment, that's absolutely fine. If you want to just get into these augmented 6 chords a little bit more, the Italian, the French and the German, have a look elsewhere on the YouTube channel, because I've already made a video that explains those in a bit more detail. But there we are. Those were the 10 chords. How did you get on? If you scored 10 out of 10, well done, you're a musical genius. If you managed to get 7 out of 10, you're doing really well. Maybe it's just the chromatic chords that caught you out there. And if you didn't know about extended chords and about inversions, but you did know about the rest, well, that should hopefully have pushed things forwards a bit for you. So there we are. Name that chord.